Well, we're going to be looking at Colossians 3. Dave read several moments ago, and when you look at this, I mean, right off the bat, we read words that for some, we read this verse in verse 18, and people react to it. It starts off, "Wives, submit to your husbands as fitting to the Lord." And right off the bat, you read that, you've offended some people. There are people, some you might be here, might be thinking, are you serious? Is that kind of church? He really believes that in marriage that wives are to submit to their husbands. That's an idea a lot of people believe, completely out of date, totally sexist, and they're like, who would believe that even anymore today? Now, as we just read in Colossians 3:18, we see that the Bible does teach that men are to be spiritual leaders in the home. And within marriage, wives should submit to that leadership. And I believe that the Bible is God's word. And so when I say this, what I'm saying, it's not what I think. What I'm saying is this is what God says, and He is the designer of what it means to be male and female. He's the one who created our gender. He's the one that created marriage. And His plans never go out of date. And so therefore, it makes sense that if we want to make marriage work, just as we've talked throughout this whole series of Colossians, if you have something, if you want to make it work, well, then it makes sense to follow the instruction manual. If you put the wrong fuel in an engine, it's not going to work. You've got to follow the instruction manual. But I do want to say that as we look at these verses are probably amongst some of the most misunderstood and misapplied in all the Bible. So, in other words, what we've got to realize is that what these verses are saying aren't necessarily what a lot of people think they say. So we've got to try to say, okay, let's look at the Bible. Let's look deeply. And as we do that, what we're going to see is that I started to think about this and pray about it. What I realized is that part of the problem is that it's building a concept. It's building a picture of here's what marriage looks like. But that building is based upon a foundation of male and female, upon gender, upon God's created order. And part of the problem is that if we don't have the foundation, we can try to build a building, and the building's going to fall apart if we've not spent time talking about the foundation. So what I'm going to do is this week I'm going to kind of step back. It's kind of going different than, as I studied this, I felt God calling me to go a different direction than I originally planned. And I want to step back and spend time on the foundation. And then next week really say, okay, now what is God calling us to build? And so when we look at the problem, what is the problem at the foundational level? The problem is there's a tremendous amount of confusion about gender identity and gender roles. And does anybody have any question anymore today that this is a significant problem in our culture? One of the most controversial subjects is when you talk about anything now related to gender. But we think that it's new, but it's not new. Actually, this is something that has been a problem over the past few decades. We've struggled with what does it mean to be male and female. Men are told that they need to get in touch with their feminine side. Women are told that they can do everything that men can do. And to many, it becomes even now offensive to say that the genders are different, or that one gender has natural abilities that are greater than the other gender, one that can do something better than the other. I mean, to some, that's offensive. And so over time, what's happened is that we've had the culture pushing this narrative, that men and women are not only equal, but they're the same. Over time, we've become increasingly confused about what it means for a man to be a man. We've become increasingly confused about what it means for a woman to be a woman. And it's just now building off that we've gone to, I think, some even far crazier levels to this past year where now we don't even know what it means to be a man. So now we can't say that a man is a man and a woman is a woman and what makes a man, and so especially with the explosion of the whole transgender thing. And so we hear now huge debates about the idea of transgenders and transgender bathrooms and the Obama administration saying that the schools need to open up the bathrooms so that a transgender, one who is born a male but thinks themselves a female, should not only be able to use female bathrooms but female locker rooms, or vice versa, because we can't define what male and female is. It's interesting that you have on Facebook, you have, even in New York City, I heard that they have, I think it's around 30 different genders now, that you can choose these different genders. It's not, can't say male or female, we've got to have all these different genders. Another example of this is in college campuses. In college campuses, increasingly, people are starting to say, I don't, our usual pronouns, him and her, I don't really think of myself as a him or a her. I'm something different. So now we're making up new pronouns, and college campuses are allowing these new pronouns. Let me give you, this is from a college, University of Arizona, approved pronoun list. That you have all these different pronouns. So ni, he, her, ze, zer, spavavik. I don't even know how to say that. And it has all these different things of how to, and they're making up letters and saying, if you want to use these as pronouns, you can. And that way you can call yourself something other than he or her. Now that's you look at that and you think, what in the world is going on? It's this problem that we become more and more confused about what it means for a man to be masculine, what it means for a woman to become feminine. And now we've become, so confused that we don't even know what male or female is. Now, as we try to work this all through, one of the things that I want you to realize is that this all has a source. It does have a source in thought. All of the gender confusion is ultimately rooted in an evolutionary worldview. So why is it we shouldn't be surprised that it's really being pushed in college campuses? See, according to evolutionary theory, everything is the result of chance. So nothing is intentionally designed. Everything has happened by chance and has been driven by kind of biological necessities. So therefore, the whole idea of gender is the result of chance mutation driven by the biological necessity of the reproduction of our species. It's not designed, it's by chance. And its evolution was only shaped to meet the needs of reproduction for that time. And as time changes and the need for reproduction change, we should expect that our whole concept of gender should evolve as well. So therefore, when we just had a few people on the planet and we needed to reproduce, well, see, gender evolved in a certain way to maximize that reproduction. Well, now that we've become, some would say, even overpopulated, we should expect gender to continue to evolve so that gender now doesn't emphasize reproduction as much. So the whole idea that what you had in the plumbing to help reproduction, we shouldn't expect male and female to be driven by any sense of reproduction. So when you think of that, it not only goes to that broad concept, but let's say specifically. When you think about yourself specifically, there's no design. You haven't been designed of who you are. Who you are is just by chance. It's the luck of the draw. Whether you're male or female was just a pure accident. And since it's not a matter of design but chance, we shouldn't be surprised if periodically not only do these ideas of gender evolve, but if the wiring gets mixed. So if you have somebody who's born with external female and male or internal male or vice versa. Because again, there's no design. It is all by chance. And so that's what's happening, is that what you have is this idea that, that things are evolving, things are by chance, and by the result of that, what you have is, what is gender? We should expect it to evolve. And what are you? We should expect it to be accidental, and we shouldn't be surprised if it's all by chance that you just have by chance, you have, the parts mixed up. And we shouldn't force people into our old ideas of what gender is based on past evolutionary necessities. Now, if you understand that, I'm not saying in any way it's not right, but at least you can somewhat understand where the thinking comes from. Now, what do I believe? I believe that we are created by God. And not only that, when we talk about evolution and creation, back earlier, or at the end of last year, we spent several months talking about that whole idea. If you're here, I'm going to make some assumptions. If you want to test these assumptions, but that whole series is online. We'd encourage you to go watch it, to download it. But here's the assumption that we're coming to. In that study, we saw very clearly that not only does the Bible claim that we're created, science demonstrated that we're created. All the evidence of science, if you have an open mind and say, okay, now what is science? If it's possible we're created and designed, or if it's possible that we happen by chance. All science says that we were created, we were designed. All the evidence points strongly towards that. Again, if you doubt that, go back and look at the series. We spent a lot of time demonstrating that. And so the evolutionary theory is a false one. Instead, we are designed by God. And what does God say about our design? Not only in gender, we're going to see in a minute, but specifically as individuals. Look at what it says in Psalm 139. For you formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. You hear saying? That God designed our inner parts, our inner wiring. That those are part of his design. And he not only did our inner parts, he did our outer parts, our frame. That those were designed by God. Just the way that God had intended. And you know what that means? God didn't mess up. It isn't that God set things into motion and said, okay, well, let's see what happens, and well, things are kind of, no, God doesn't mess up. And that who we are is a result of God's design. That's true of each person. Now, some people will say, well, I feel like I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, and so it's better for me to change bodies and to live as a person that I feel like that I am. But here's where, I said this back in the series here. I want to say it again. It's totally politically incorrect, but it's what we need to, I think it's truth. See, we commonly understand in every area of life, we just have to apply logic to some of these things. If someone thinks that there's someone other than who they are in reality, we call that a psychological problem. And so if you have somebody that comes in and says, I think I'm George Washington. I think I'm the president. People should follow me. Or somebody comes, I think I'm Superman. I'm going to go climb on the building and I'm going to go fly. We sit there and we take that person and we do not say, what I want to do is that I want to just empower you to live the life that you want. You think you're Superman? Here, let's take you to go fly. That would be terrible. We don't encourage the person to think that they're George Washington and try to recreate, Mount Vernon so that they can live on that. No, we recognize that it's a psychological problem, that they're living in a make-believe world where their perceived reality doesn't match the reality. And so we try to help them to be able to get back to reality and live in real life with what's true. Now, if that's true, if they think they're Superman or if they think that they're George Washington, why would it not be true that if you have someone who biologically is created as a male and they think that they're a female? See, what you have is you have someone who's living outside of reality. Is it a real problem? Yes. Do people really struggle with it? Yes. Am I condemning them for their struggle? No. What I'm saying is that the loving thing to do, the wise thing to do, isn't to say, well, because you're thinking that, therefore we should affirm that and throw out all ideas of sexuality. No, what we should say is, no, that you are designed and you are built the way God designed you. Let us help you understand God's design and live as the man, and live as the woman whom God created you to be. Now, as we understand all that, that's this idea, which comes out of a evolutionary worldview. What are we trying to say here? Is that it will only make sense if we understand that our gender differences are rooted in creation. We need to have a created worldview that recognizes that God in the very beginning created everything. See, people will even say, well, no, the gender differences they're evolutionary, or they're cultural. It was because a certain culture saw things this way, and it pressured men to act a certain way and women to act a certain way. There's nothing inherent in masculinity or femininity. Now, I will acknowledge there are some things that are cultural. There are some things that, that in an older generation, you might say, well, this is a man's role, and a younger generation may not. And you might look at that and you say, it's not a biblical thing, it's a cultural thing. But there are some things about masculinity and femininity that are biblical. Because the fact is that God has created us male and female. And femininity and masculinity is in creation. We see that all the way back in the very beginning. Here's where we're going to go to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis 1:26, the very first record of the creation of mankind. It says, and then God said, let us make man in our image and our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over livestock and over the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Now, one of the things that I want you to notice, first of all, it's interesting that you notice that you have the first reference to the Trinity. God said, let us make man, that you have a plurality of God here. I won't spend too much time there. But what's interesting is not only that God refers to himself in the plural, but then look at how God changes and how he talks about man, going from the singular to the plural. Let me show you. Again, look at this. Let us make man singular, in our image, in our likeness, and let them, plural, rule over the fish of the sea and over the live with birds. Verse 27. So God created man, singular, in his image. In the image of God, he created him, singular, male and female, plural, he created them, plural. And so you sit there and say, what is the whole meaning of this whole idea? And the point is that God created man. When it says man, I think it says the word man here that's several times could probably be better translated mankind. That what you have in the singular is God describing what he did with mankind. And then he says, okay, I created mankind. Mankind is a singular unit. But then you have within mankind, you have a plural. So look at, in a sense, this is how we could read it. And God said, let us make mankind in our image. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, or mankind. Male and female, he created them as individuals. And here's why this is significant. Is what it's saying is that the image bearers of God are mankind, not men. Mankind is created in God's image. And when he says God created in mankind, male and female, he created them, I think the teaching that he's giving us here is that when he created mankind, he took some of his image and he poured it more fully into the masculine. And he took some of his image and he poured it more fully into the feminine. So there's a sense that when he created mankind, what you have is part of God is reflected more in masculine, part of God is reflected more fully in feminine. I'm not saying that God is a woman. God isn't male or female. God is a spirit. Now, I do think that God refers to himself in the masculine in the Bible, and I don't think we should take it upon ourselves to change what God has said. But it's not saying that God is a male. God is a spirit that is neither male or female, and he does have some character traits that are more feminine, and you see that throughout the Bible. You see it talking about his compassion. You see in Jesus the compassion that Jesus had, that the children would want to come to him. But you see also the incredible strength of God. You see the courage. You see in Jesus Christ, we're going to see at the end, you see this incredible strength and tenacity of Jesus Christ, the masculine traits of God. So that God created gender, male and female, he created different by design. And because it was by design, because part of masculinity reflects part of his character, and femininity reflects part of his character, we've got to realize that not only is it by design, but it's good. It's the way that God wanted it to be. It's not that God created it and he says, okay, let me make male and female. Oh, man, I forgot about that. Boy, I messed up. Why did I make her that way? No, God didn't do that. Everything about who we are is about his design. And here's what he says. It's not only that, but then when he creates the design is to be perfected in relationship, and specifically in marriage. Because what happens in marriage? In marriage, what happens is when a man and a woman come together and they commit themselves into that lifelong commitment, the fact is that when we get married, we make the best representation of God because we need each other. The fact is that I have certain traits that reflect God's character, but I'm lacking some things. Sandy has other traits. My wife has other traits that reflect God's character. And what she has is a reflection of what I'm lacking and what I need. And where I'm strong is a reflection of where she's lacking and where she has need. And what happens is that when we come together, we in a sense fill each other's gaps. Now, even in this, what we've got to understand is that I need my wife to learn from. Now, oftentimes when you hear people talk about that in our culture, again, you hear this, men need to get in touch with their feminine side. Again, we hear that all the time, right? Often, culturally, what that means is that men need to be less masculine. Stop being a man and start being more like a woman. You need to become more feminine. And what we have to realize is that what the Bible teaches here is that God has called us to be who we have created to be, and nothing less. And so when I become involved in a marriage and learn from the strengths of my wife, it doesn't mean that I in any way become less masculine. It means that I add to my masculinity something that I don't have. It doesn't mean that she is in any way ever called to be less feminine. That as men, we are called to be able to be strong in our masculinity. Women, you're called to be strong in your femininity. You're called to excel in those things. We're called to excel in those character traits. They're different, and we need each other. But the problem is that when we often get into this discussion, that we talk about these differences and people start talking about, but equality. God has created us to be equal. I want to affirm that. God, between men and women, there is equality in Jesus Christ. The Bible is very clear on that. That both men and women reflect part of the character of God. Both of us are equal. But being equal doesn't mean being the same. You see, we need to embrace equality, but at the same time, we need to be able to embrace diversity. The Bible that says that we are both image bearers of God, but to say that we are equal doesn't mean that we're equivalent. See, and that's the confusion. That's the confusion that people have. Men and women are created as equal, but not equivalent. In the culture, when you start talking about the differences, that men are stronger at this, and women, what happens? People get offended. Women can do everything that men can. And no, they're equal, but they're different. One of the things that's interesting about this is that we understand this in the general culture. If you go outside of church, if you go outside of theology, if you go outside of family structure, we understand that men and women are different. We joke about it all the time. Comedians make a living basically telling jokes about men and women. Why is it, joke about women. Do these pants like me if I look fat? Why? Because it's saying something about a woman's sense of security and identity. And you wouldn't expect for a man to say that. If a man were to say that, or a comedian were to joke about a man saying that, you'd be like, that's stupid. We joke about men, and we joke about them watching sports and all these things, and why? Because we understand that there's a difference. So let me even try to illustrate this in a humorous way. Some of you know that we at times use these little videos, the skit guys, and here's one that they put together that illustrates this idea. They're challenging men to communicate to their wives. And I think you'll enjoy this. The message is simple, it's there. But I'm going to ask you 2 questions after you watch it.
All right, I got it. She's gonna love it. Let's go.
Whoa, how'd you find a card so fast?
I am a speaker of lady language. I hear their voices in my head, much like Beethoven heard music.
No, I think those are just voices.
Either way, I've got a card, and you don't.
I'm trying to find one with the right words. I can't find one that really describes how I feel.
Here, this one.
This one. This is the one.
Yeah.
Okay. Sugar is sweet and so is honey. I bought you this card because I had no money.
That is so you.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not. It's not me.
What are you trying to say?
I need a card that says, I don't deserve you. I never have, and I never will. From the moment that I first saw you, I knew that I wanted to be with you, to know you, to understand you. I am humbled that you chose me. I have married out of my league, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't recognize that fact. And I've never taken our vows lightly. What do I say to the mother of my children, my best friend, my soulmate? I love you can just sound so cliche and trite, but it's the only words that I know. I love you. That would be a card, That would be a card that I'd want to buy. What's the matter? What happened?
Don't look at me.
Okay.
Look away.
I have. What's the matter?
It's like I'm a swimming pool, and your words are like cannonballs landing. Pull yourself together, man. Attention, everybody. We are in the presence of a true wordsmith.
No, we're not.
Allow his words to be the wings on which your cards fly.
No.
I want what he's having.
Okay, we need to go. We need to go right now.
I've got an idea. We'll get those cards that are blank on the inside, and we'll write your words on them, and then we'll give them to our ladies. But we have to write in calligraphy.
I'm just going to take your card.
Wait, what was that part about the true soulmates? I need a pen. I gotta write this down. That stuff is gold. That'll give me a whole Sunday of football.
Now let me ask, why is that funny? Because it's rooted in truth. You know, you sit there and you know, okay, women need words, women need affirmation. That's important. That's why, why we buy cards for our wives, and we don't value them generally as much. We need those. And because we understand that historically, but we've struggled to understand, we've elevated poets who can take those words and say them in a romantic and a memorable way. But it's also funny that men relate to the challenge, because we know that that's what our wives want. We don't know how to say it. And, if we think of giving time to it, then we don't know how to say it. And so we see that. But also in the middle of this, here's the other question. What if you had that same thing, that exact same script, and you had women playing the parts? What would you think of that? I mean, it'd be silly. I mean, it'd be stupid. It wouldn't be funny. It would just be dumb. Because we know that men and women are different. That makes sense only from the sense of understanding the unique differences. Now, here's what you want to say, is that we can sit there and we can talk in humor and we can talk about all the differences that men and women have, and we all know that, but somehow then when we come to theology and family, we say men and women are created different. Well, how offensive, how terrible that could be, how judgmental, no, how sexist. No, men and women are created different. We know that. We know that in our experience. That we're different. We're equal, but equality does not mean equivalency. So that we are equal but different. It's not one is better than the other, one is superior than the other, but God wants us to be confident in men and women, confident in our masculinity and femininity, confident in the unique strengths that He has given to each one of us. And then it makes sense that if we are different, then when He says, okay, now here's this designed relationship that I want you to have called marriage, and I've given you each strengths, doesn't make sense logically that He would say, now I'm going to give you slightly different roles within that. And that's what we see happening. That's why we're building this foundation. Next week, we're going to spend a lot of time unpacking what those roles are, but you need to understand where it comes from. And not only understanding yourself, but know how to defend. And how do we defend the people that are arguing against this? You've got to understand, if you don't have the foundation, then trying to build the building of what a marriage should look like won't make sense. So God has made us equal but different. And then it's in marriage, God has designed those differences to be expressed in different roles. See, we have different giftedness, and it's by design. But it's how we do that. And then we say, okay, what are those different roles? What should those look like? And on the one hand, we would understand there's certain things it's natural that women are going to be better than men. Men are going to be better than women. But it's not left to us to figure out what those roles would be. It's not saying, okay, what do you think it would be? Or as the culture evolves, what should it be? What we've got to do is come back and say that, again, God has designed certain things. Now, in that, I will acknowledge that a lot of the cultural roles between male and female, or the roles are cultural. When God talks about the design roles of men and women, there's a lot of things that aren't in the Bible. Most of the things aren't in the Bible. There are a few things are. There are a lot of things that we might have in our own mindset of saying, well, here's what men do, here's what women do. That's what we're raised with. That's what our culture said. Many of those things are cultural. But we've got to do is say, okay, what is cultural? What is right for me on this? What is right for our family? But then what is biblical? The cultural will change. The biblical will not change. The biblical are God's design, and no matter how the culture changes, the fact is that if we built it according to the designer's plans, the relationship will work. If we do not build the relationship according to the designer's plans, the relationship will not work. So what has He done? He's given us a few areas within marriage that what God has done is He's designed roles of marriage that draw out the strength of each gender. And when we look at this and we talk about husbands leading and we talk about wives submitting and what that means and we talk about those different things, what we're going to see is that even next week when we talk about the idea of wife submitting, that is not a passive statement. That is a statement of strength. That's where this is so misunderstood. That is not saying, okay, wives, you just follow, go along. No, that's saying, understand, women, your unique strengths, because God has given you unique strengths. This is how you use it in a way that makes the marriage work, that actually makes you more effective in building up your husband and building unity in the relationship. See, it's not only drawing out your strengths, but then it's also meeting the greatest needs of your gender, or of your spouse and his gender or her gender. See, because here's what happens is that we look at these different strengths and you say, okay, wives, what does it mean to submit? Well, part of it is understanding that you got to understand that men are insecure. And part of that insecurity is that, we're always beating ourselves up with things. We're always struggling. And part of that is that if you learn to relate to him in a sense that you use the strength that you have to build up your husband, to protect him, to draw out his strengths, you have tremendous ability, but it's that ability of saying, honor your husband. We're going to talk about what that means next week. It's using your strength to not only draw out what God has made you to be, but to meet the greatest need of your spouse. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, and understanding that what God's calling us to do is to lead in sacrificial love in a way that loves our wives, because what they need is they need not only somebody who's willing to show that strength as God has called, but in a way that's sacrificial, that's servant leadership. The way that is willing to say that I'm going to find you as lovable no matter what you do. I'm going to serve you. I'm not going to stop doing, it's not at all conditional. See, that's God's design. There is a sense that what you see in God's design is that we're going to see again, play this out a whole lot more. From the very beginning, God has designed an order within marriage for men to provide leadership, for women to submit to that leadership, both using their strengths in very, very different ways. You see it from the very beginning, Genesis chapter 2. You have Genesis chapter 2. God created the garden. He gives Adam the command. Adam, don't eat from the tree. Then he creates Eve after he gives the command. We have no record of him ever repeating that. And the whole idea is he's now entrusted Adam to take the spiritual leadership to his home and to provide that spiritual leadership. And what happens? They come and eat the apple. Satan comes and tempts Eve. Adam is there all the time listening to that and failing to provide the leadership. People will say, well, Eve ate the apple. No, Eve ate the apple because Adam failed first. Now here's what I want you to see is that the effect of that was something that was far deeper. When we think of the curse, I'm going to look at Genesis 3:16 and the curse specifically to women. I want you to realize when we read this, it's a whole lot deeper than what we often think it to be. To the woman he said, I will surely multiply your chains in childbearing. In pain you will bring forth your children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Now we just think that usually it's just saying, well, childbearing is we're going to have bad labor, so that's what it means. No, it's a whole lot more than that. It's not only will multiply your pain in childbearing, it really refers to childbearing and child rearing. That here, what you were supposed to be so wonderful in the family of having kids and be pleasurable and raising, they're going to be rebellious now. They're going to have a sin nature. It's going to be difficult. It's still a blessing, but it's difficult. But not only that, I created this incredible structure in marriage for your husband to take the lead and for you to be able to follow that lead. But from now on, your desire is going to be to take charge. My plan was for him to be a spiritual leader, and from here on in, my plan is still the same, but your desire is going to be to take charge. And not only that, men, from here on in, your desire is going to be passive. Your desire is going to be able to want to escape what God has called you to do. That when you understand the fall, what you understand is that the fall and the curse literally cursed something in our masculinity and femininity. It broke something essential within marriage. So how do we build that? How do we build this back? And what we've got to realize is that the only hope isn't to somehow say, well, what's cultural saying? What makes sense to me? We've got to come back to the Bible. We need to say, what is the gospel principles? We need to come back and we need to say, God, I agree with you that I'm not doing it right. We need the gospel. The gospel is basically, Jesus, God, I agree with you, I'm a sinner. God, I'm broken. I cannot fix myself. Thank you for dying on the cross. I ask you to take my brokenness, take it upon yourself. Father, forgive me for where I've messed up and make me right. And you know what we need to do is we need to preach the gospel to us. We first of all have to get right with God. And as we get right with God, then say, okay, God, now how do I apply that principle into my marriage? You've forgiven me in all these areas. God, I recognize that my masculinity is broken. Forgive me where I mess up. And Father, teach me to be able to live out my masculinity. Teach me to live out as a man, as the woman that God's called you to be. See, what we need to do is then reclaim and restore God's intended design. And I'm just going to say a couple things real briefly in closing, and this is all, again, just setting up for next week. We're going to kind of explore this a whole lot more. Let me, just to women, just a brief word of encouragement. The culture has tried so long to argue for equality for women that they've confused equality with sameness. And what we tend to do is we spend so much time trying to affirm that you can do everything the man can do that we ignore the truth that women are different. So much so that to say to a woman that you need to get in touch with your femininity, God's called you to be feminine, to some women it's offensive. Now when I say that, femininity doesn't mean that you wear pink or lace or things like that. That's the cultural part. What it means is that God has put part of his character in you as a woman that is more fully revealed in you than it is in men. There's part of God's character, and part of his design is that you know that. And no matter how much our culture tries to discourage it and say, well, no, you shouldn't be that, you need to realize that God has called you to be a woman and to be proud of your femininity, to increase it. It doesn't mean that you walk away from the other things. It means that God help me to know who I am and to increase that, to live in that, to live in my strength, to maximize it. And as we're going to say to men in a moment, one of the challenges in this is that because your femininity is broken, you can't fix it on your own. It starts by coming and saying, God, I ask you to fix something in me. But then it also means I need to get with some other women. I need to spend time. That's why we have women's ministries. I need to spend time with women who are a little further on this path and that are figuring out what it means what this looks like. How do I be a godly woman? How do I live out these principles in my life? What are the timeless truths that God wants me to be able to live in and to be proud of and unashamed? To men, I want to encourage you, masculinity is under attack in our culture like no one's business. And we see this all the time. You just look in our culture, pretty much, especially any comedy, the guy is always the buffoon. The guy is always the idiot. The man never knows what he's doing. In some movies you say, well, here you have a male hero, but now when you have a male hero, you've got to have a woman hero doing everything that the man does, because the man can't be in any way unique. Masculinity is under attack. And any time that we talk about male leadership, in any way, that's attack. We need to celebrate. Women can lead, but we need to discourage men. We need to put them down. And I need you to realize that God has called you to be men. And this has got to be, the church has got to be a place where we lift up masculinity, where your role as a man is celebrated. Too often, even in the church, we don't do that. Too often in the church, we portray an image of spirituality that isn't masculine. I mean, let me even take images of Jesus. I mean, you look at a picture of Jesus, and you look at that picture. I mean, he looked like he just went to the hairstylist and is getting a glam shot. I mean, come on, that is not a masculine picture. And oftentimes when we think of the images of Jesus, we talk about his compassion, and he's so kind, and he's so loving, and we celebrate his feminine traits, and we almost present him, I think the closest we get is like Mr. Rogers. It's kind of like Jesus is the kind Mr. Rogers everybody can come to, and he offers wise counsel and wisdom. Now here, let me ask you a question. Could you imagine Mr. Rogers being pulled out in front of thousands of people who are calling to have him tortured and crucified? No. No, nobody calls out and wants to kill Mr. Rogers. But there was something about Jesus that wasn't very Mr. Rogers-like, because that's what they did to him. Jesus was a man's man. He was a carpenter. He was a man that drew other men to him. It's who liked him? The fishermen. Who hated him? The politicians. That should tell you something. When you think about Jesus' masculinity, he never failed to do the right thing. He had encouraged. He never failed to say the right thing, no matter what the cost would be, because he feared no one. He wasn't impressed by anyone. He had incredible humility. He knew that he was God eternal. He could call the angels down. But he didn't do that. He was humble and emptied himself and served because he knew that he didn't need anyone else's adoration. That he lived for other people. He had self-sacrifice, that he gave himself. He was the ultimate warrior in giving of himself, of giving of his life, of not pursuing pain, but not running away from pain. Literally going to the cross, knowing everything that was about to happen, and yet said, I'm going to take it because I'm going to give of myself to meet the needs of the people I came to serve. You know what? That's just a little image. That's masculinity. That's the kind of men that God has called us to be. And men, we need to lift up that masculinity. We need to be a place where we recognize that we need men to be men. That we celebrate that this needs to be a place where it is a masculine place. and where masculinity is encouraged, it is celebrated, because the more that we have men who are willing to be men, who are godly fathers, who are godly husbands, who are godly examples, that's the most significant thing that's going to happen in the context of our culture. Are you willing to be men? Men, are you willing to stand up? Are you willing to say, God, I'm willing to go there? I want to encourage you, you're not going to be able to do it on your own. Our masculinity, all of us are broken. And it starts by, again, coming and saying, God, I need you to put in me what I do not have in myself. But then it also means that we need to come alongside other men and say, okay, let me fellowship with other men who are going to help me figure out what this actually looks like. I challenge you, I encourage you, men, are you willing to step up and be men? Next week, we're going to look a little bit more of what this actually looks like in the context of marriage. But I hope that each one of you, you know what, every one of you, you're either man or woman, so you're hopefully encouraged to live out the role whom God has called you to live out as you go out this week.